I think the I think that the community ownership of land is one of the best ways for our neighborhoods to be diverse, affordable, and equitable. I'm also a member of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, and in a former time, I was one of the community-elected board members of the Land Trust as well. And finally, the third point, as a priest, as a Christian, the question of land is very important to me. I belong to a church who has pretty massive land holdings. And so I, along with some of my colleagues who are in the room this evening, have been trying to push our church to decommodify and decolonize our understanding of land by freeing that land up for affordable housing, for community uses, and for reparations. Not only that, but we Anglicans, along with everybody who lives on this land, are subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement that was originally between the indigenous nations of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, but extended to include other indigenous and settler peoples. This covenant calls us to share and care for the land around the Great Lakes. So we gather here tonight under the terms of this covenant, acknowledging the historic and ongoing presence of the indigenous keepers of this land, hoping for and working toward a way of being with the land and with each other that's not conditioned by extraction and displacement, but by sharing and caring. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from all of the presenters this evening. But before we get there, I think I'm going to hand things over to Norma, who's going to be coming in on Zoom. So let's just make sure that that works.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Reverend Jason, for opening the space for this discussion. On behalf of Planners Network, the sponsor of tonight's event, I want to thank everyone for coming out to what will most certainly be a highly informative and inspiring discussion from such an impressive group of organizations and representatives from those groups, facilitated by the always amazing and insightful Kuni Kamizaki. And with, again, thanks for the space provided by St. Mark's Church. My name is Norma Rantisi. I'm one of the co-chairs of Planners Network, and I'm coming to you from Montreal, Jojake, which is unceded lands of the Ganagahaga nations. And I'm sorry I couldn't be present in person with you due to COVID, but happy that this is still a possibility to come in through this online virtual space. Planners Network is an organization of progressive and radical planning practitioners, academics, and organizers in Turtle Island and beyond. I just want to provide a brief history of the organization and some of the activities before I pass it on to our local steering committee member, Keisha St. Louis McBurnie, who will share our statement of principles. Planners Network originated in 1975 when it was founded by Chester Hartman as a network of like-minded planners who wanted to share ideas of radical and progressive planning practices and to build up a community of support. It was an extension of a precursor organization, Planners for Equal Opportunity, based out of New York City in the 1960s, which grew out of the civil rights movement and fiercely opposed urban renewal and the displacement of low-income communities of color, and especially contesting the role of mainstream planning in enabling such displacement. PN has sought to build on that legacy and to not only challenge the ongoing complicity of mainstream planning in displacement, in colonial planning, both here and abroad, economic and environmental injustices, and designing cities and towns for the cis, white, heterosexual, ableist, well-off male, but also to strive to envision planning otherwise, and to envision the prospects for a more just form, which is very much what the panel of speakers will be addressing today. At present, we have local chapters in the US and Canada and representation in Mexico. We have an online magazine, Progressive City Radical Alternatives, and do consider contributing a jargon-free 200-word essay. We host events as well as social media presence, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Progressive City has Twitter as well, Peace City Radical, as well as a Facebook page for the magazine. And I'd like to point out that there are some steering committee and longtime members in the audience, apart from Keisha, who you will meet in just a moment. Steering committee member Anna Kramer, who's been helping with the setup for this event and overseeing of the Zoom. Some longtime members such as Barbara Rader and Catherine Rankin hopefully are present. I can't tell who's exactly in the space or room. Progressive City editorial member Jeffrey Lowe is also present and could also provide information both of the organization and the magazine. So if you are in this space, please put your hands up so people can know to ask you about these things afterwards. And finally, if Kara Chalou's in the space, Kara's looking to update our student disorientation guide. Now, just a final note, one of our founding members and co-founders of our online magazine was the internationally renowned Peter Marcuse. And I just wanted to take a moment to pay tribute to Peter, who we lost earlier this year. As many know, Peter was an ardent advocate for housing justice, for the provision of housing for those most in need, and not just across the board, and who had a famous motto, expose, propose, and politicize. It was not enough for Peter to expose injustices, but he always sought to push forward to address them. If he were here with us today, it would be him speaking and not me. And because he would never miss such a historic event as this in the convening of these 5 community land trusts. Indeed, Peter is present as we try to move his mission forward. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to turn it over now to Keisha.
Awesome, thank you, Norma. We also just wanted to take a moment to share that the Planners Network has taken the time to update our statement of principles. So following the proliferation of the movement for Black Lives in 2020, and more recently with all of the crises that we're experiencing that have both been catalyzed and exacerbated by COVID-19, we as an organization have been thinking a lot about what our roles are as planners in this current moment. And in doing so, we've taken the time to update that statement of principles to reflect what our current call to action is as the organization of progressive planning. And so with that, I'm going to take a moment to read out our updated statement of principles, and then I'll pass things over to Cooney to kick things off. And so as an organization, we are a coordinated network of individual members and of chapters based in cities, regions, and campuses around North America, also known as Turtle Island and beyond. We publish the online magazine, Progressive City, distribute a monthly newsletter, participate in and lead advocacy and organizing efforts, host public events like the one today, and gather for conferences. As progressives, we are aligned with social movements that seek to transform society in order to achieve equity and liberation for all oppressed peoples. We want to progress away from racial capitalism, toward egalitarian socialism, away from extractive neocolonialism and towards abolition and decolonization, away from environmental catastrophe and towards climate justice, away from patriarchy and towards feminist liberation, away from the status quo and towards freedom. As planners, we are planning practitioners, activists, academics, and students engaged in the process of shaping space over time. We work in planning agencies and we protest against them, as well as the exploitative systems they uphold. We study, teach, practice, and fight for a form of planning that is transformative, anti-racist, geared towards the full realization of human rights, dignity, and spatial justice. We also seek in public and social responsibility for meeting these needs because the private market was never designed to do so. And with that, I'll pass things over to Cooney.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful welcome and the comments about the Planners Network. My name is Kuni Kamizaki. I am right now assistant professor at the University of Toronto. I'm really, really excited to be back in Parkdale and then see so many great faces in the community. So I am facilitating tonight this wonderful and exciting the conversation tonight, and I'm not sure how excited. I don't know if you know how excited I am right now. Well, this is really exciting because this is. Well, sorry, I'm keep repeating it, but this is so exciting because this is for the first time in history that all of us, so to speak, second generation of community lunches in Toronto get together. This is really, really amazing. And I say second generation community land trusts because the land trusts itself are not necessarily new to Toronto. We have co-op sector-led land trusts from the 80s. But we are second generations community land trusts because most of us, all of us, are emerging from the struggle against displacement, gentrifications. We are emerging from a struggle for housing justice, economic democracy, racial justice. And we are valuing the importance of community democratic control. So I'm really, really fortunate to working with you all for the past almost 10 years. And then this is such an amazing opportunity for us to even have this collective space of reflection. So really, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight. And also Ivy from the on the Zoom. So without further ado, let's get into the discussions, because we have 5 discussion questions that we'd like to discuss together. And I know not everybody's actually from Toronto, so just show a hand if you're visiting Toronto today. Oh, actually, so maybe many of them on Zoom, I guess. So maybe the first question is, briefly, please tell us what kind of organizations you're working with, and just maybe start from there. I'm gonna pass this mic to Josh, I guess, first.
Hello. Hey everyone, so nice to be here tonight. My name is Joshua Barnt. I'm with the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust and the Neighborhood Land Trust, which is our charitable arm. And so obviously we come from Parkdale, the neighborhood you're in, so welcome, everyone who's visiting. So we were formed from an idea in 2010 and incorporated in 2014, so we've been around for 8 years. So we're still early in our development, but we have had the privilege to have some success so far. In 2014, after a number of conversations about how the neighborhood will respond to the increasing gentrification and displacement, 7 local organizations identified representatives to join a board of the Land Trust to steward forward this new organization. That included a local nonprofit supportive housing organization, the Community Legal Clinic, the BIA, an environmental charity, and 2 local residents associations. So a broad set of sort of stakeholders came together to do this. And why did we do it? Well, Parkdale has historically been a community that has been home to many people who are low income, a place where refugees and immigrants have found a home, and a place where people with experiences of being psychiatric survivors, living with addiction, living with mental health experiences have found a home. And as land values have gone up, as we've all seen across Toronto, low profit land uses are being pushed out of our community. What are those low profit land uses? Affordable housing, space for nonprofits, space for community to gather, space for the legal clinic, space for locally serving businesses. So people are being displaced, and organizations are being displaced, and important businesses are being displaced. And so we believe that this was a real estate problem, as Dominique often says, and we needed a real estate solution, but we needed one that would put community in control. So being inspired by movements in the US around taking control of community using the community land trust, a movement that emerges out of the civil rights movement in the United States and is very linked to the history of racial justice and movements around racial justice in the US, we determined to take direction from those movements and implement a community land trust. And so our goal is to maintain a community-controlled organization that can both take ownership of land, steward that land, but provide ongoing community-based governance and decision-making around the use of that land. And so a few things about our vision. So we envision a community where all residents can participate in shaping the development and stewardship of the land in the neighborhood. All residents can benefit from development that does not displace them, but enhances the social, economic, environmental, and cultural well-being that we experience. And where all residents have equitable access to affordable and adequate housing, inclusive economic opportunities, healthy food, community programs, social services, green spaces, and relationships with others. I guess I'll end by saying that we currently own, actually when we started, we told Gord and others, like, the community would like to create a community land trust. We're going to try to take ownership of private land and keep it affordable. And people were like, are you crazy? You're going to buy land? Like, the community's going to buy land in this market? You're crazy. And we talked to people at the city and they're like, community what? Community land what? And, but we stuck through, and, we worked and we figured it out. And I'm proud to say that today, our community land trust stewards takes care of 84 properties across the West End, many of those in Parkdale. We have 205 units of permanently affordable housing, a majority of which are rent geared to income, so deeply affordable housing. We own one commercial space behind this church, the Milky Way urban agriculture space. So we've been able to accomplish more than I think we even thought we could. And so I just wanted to end by just saying this is possible. We are winning. And I'm so excited to hear from, the amazing communities across Toronto who are doing this, but doing it in their own ways and have a lot to teach us. Apparently I have slides. It's over. It's over. It's over. You saw them? Did you see them? Cool. And shout out to Tendon who's here. Tendon is one of the amazing staff at the Land Trust. Tendon, wave. We wouldn't be able to do it without Tendon.
I'm also really excited to be here tonight. My name's Dominique Russell, and I am the co-chair of the Kensington Community Land Trust, and my co-chair is here, Kevin Barrett. And we were very inspired by Parkdale, and very much helped by Parkdale. The Community Land Trust comes out in Kensington. Kensington Market is a small neighborhood, but iconic, and sort of Toronto's neighborhood in some ways. People have a real attachment to it, and we can think of it sometimes as the historic part of Toronto. So it was, the Land Trust comes out of anti-gentrification struggles, and in particular, organizing around the commercial Walmart. Basically, we stopped a Walmart from trying to set up right next to Kensington Market, which would have been very much about gentrification, although that is something to unpack. And also then, so Friends of Kensington Market was formed around that struggle, and then gradually it focused more and more on housing as the displacement got more and more blatant and naked, and in part through the Airbnb and ghost hotels. So Friends of Kensington Market, I've got a timeline in there somewhere. That's the neighborhood. Say no to Loblaws. There was Loblaws as well. I absolutely love this, where we were pushed out. The one if you can just go previous, yeah. stood up for chickens, stood up for communities, stood up to Walmart, evicted by Airbnb, because Kensington Market is a lot of neighborhoods that are really interesting and rental oriented. Much like Parkdale, it's a place to start. Kensington Market has the importance of its history is really as a place to start, so an immigrant neighborhood, and the displacement is of that. Kensington no longer a place to start, and people attached to the neighborhood, renters, students, immigrants, no longer possible to be part of the life of that neighborhood. And so what Airbnb does, I think you probably know, is come into a very cool neighborhood and kick everyone out. We had a very dramatic example where all the residents are gone and you have a ghost hotel. So, if we can go to that, thank you. So we were, it's actually interesting as well in terms of the formation. There was several community meetings, and the community basically said, just go and build it and come back. So there was a group of volunteers, many of them students graduate students from U of T, got together and set up this initial board. We incorporated in 2017 and had our, we now have an elected board. In 2018, we had a visioning exercise, and it's really exciting to be in person with all these activists because ideas come out of that. And I was in San Francisco with Josh and a bunch of us, and I was speaking to an activist from New York, and I said, we have this parking lot, and it really should be housing, and we could maybe, how do we get the city to, give it to us? And he said to me, you don't get the city, you don't ask the city, you take it, and then the city will follow. And that is in fact what happened. We had a visioning exercise. We had this plan to have sort of a protest where we'd have tents that looked like cars, but our city councilor said, no, please don't do that. We had a visioning exercise, which was one of the best attended meetings that we've had in Kensington. And if you've ever been to a Kensington meeting, they tend to be very exciting. They're very eclectic. There's a broad range of people. And we got together and we had this visioning exercise of what could the parking lot be. And the city councilor at the time, Joe Cressy, asked the city bureaucracy to consider that. That was in 2018. We'll come back to what happened there. But in 2021, we bought a building. And I think is it on the next slide? Sorry. So our first acquisition, the Mona Lisa building. This is a really important acquisition. The building itself, it's where the punks hang out. It has a lot of history. And it was the site of a fight, a battle to keep the tenants in their home. There was a renovation attempt, which would have, in aid of a ghost hotel, essentially. And the community came together. We'd had experience at that point. We came together and helped the tenants stay firm. The city was there. The province, our provincial MP was there. We had a lot of community support. They stayed in their homes, and that building suddenly came up for sale almost a year later. And we were very fortunate in having the relationships that we needed with U of T and others. Parkdale was very helpful, and who had and this is a really important point as well, that we were able to follow a path that had been set, so that our victory is dependent on, your victory becomes our victory, and that's part of what's beautiful about the Land Trust movement in Toronto. So we were able to acquire this building. Our long-term goal, what sets us apart is that this building is commercial. So we have 5 commercial units, 12 residential. And our long-term goal is to acquire as many buildings as we can in order to keep tenants in their homes, to keep Kensington as a place to start, as an eclectic, multicultural place, also economically diverse, and to build housing on the Green Pea parking lot in Bellevue.
I'll tell you, yeah. Okay, hi. My name is Amy Lamb, and I'm with the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust. We're a very new land trust, so we haven't incorporated yet. We're about to incorporate in January. But in this question, I'll just give you some context for how we started. So, like Kensington Market Land Trust, the kind of organization that we work alongside is Friends of Chinatown Toronto. So Friends of Chinatown Toronto is a grassroots group that is fighting for racial justice, economic justice in Toronto's Chinatown. You can go to the next slide. And actually, no, don't do that, go back. Before I go there, I just want to say a couple words about the history of Chinatown and why it's important for us to think about Chinatown as a very specific type of neighborhood in Toronto. You may know this, Chinatowns in North America are formed out of the systemic racism against Chinese people in Canada and in the States. So in Canada, most of the railroad workers who built the, whatever you call it, the rail that goes across the country, yeah, were Chinese workers, and they were paid very little and did the most dangerous work. And after that work was completed, the government made a lot of different policies to try to keep those workers out of other jobs and to get them out. So for a while, there was a head tax, which was this exorbitant sum for people that they had to pay if they wanted to immigrate to Canada. And then after that, there was the Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which lasted from 1923 to 1947, which was 24 years. And basically, in that time period, only 44 Chinese people were able to immigrate to Canada. So that's pretty recent history, right? Like 1947 is when it ended. And that also, yeah, that basically created these neighborhoods called Chinatowns that we know today, which are places of mutual aid where people who were excluded from other parts of society could live. And also, yeah, support each other. So one of the other histories of Chinatown that I think is relevant to the land trust conversation is that in Chinatowns, there's lots of mutual aid societies that are based around specific provinces or areas in China. So you can go there and perhaps be able to get money to, you know, from other community members in order to purchase property or something like that. And then you can pay it back over time if, for example, you can't get a loan from the bank. So that's kind of just like the historical context of Chinatown. We started working together as Friends of Chinatown in 2018, and you can go to the next slide now. And this was kind of the first, you know, galvanizing event, which was this sale of the Bright Pearl restaurant, which you may remember, it was a very memorable landmark in Chinatown, and some developers bought it and turned it into this gray box kind of situation. And one of the things that happened there at the beginning was there was an art fair that was held there, and so a bunch of us who are artists opposed to that art fair being held in this gentrified box. And I think that's an important thing to note that I'll come back to later, is just art washing in Chinatown and in lots of other neighborhoods that are lower income or cheaper. Yeah, and then the next thing, which, if you can advance the slide, thank you. And the next slide, which led to us wanting to start a CLT, was the redevelopment of, is the upcoming redevelopment of this block of Chinatown, which is at 315 Spadina. It's where Rolsan, the restaurant, is, as well as Ding Dong Bakery and a bunch of other local businesses. And so we went through a process with the city trying to basically have more say in the matter, but that turned out to be pretty, depressing. So with the help of CUNY and with these other land trusts in Toronto, we've been working towards starting a Chinatown land trust. And yeah, our goal is to take land off the speculative real estate market and to hold it for the workers and tenants of Chinatown. There's some more pictures, but it doesn't matter.
That's me. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you,
okay,
Ivy.
great. I'm so sorry. I was really hoping to be there in person, but I've been sick all week and it just didn't feel quite time for me to be in a room with people yet. So my name's Ivy Farker McDonald. I'm the tenant engagement coordinator with Circle Community Land Trust. Circle CLT is a bit different from the other neighborhood-based CLTs that are here tonight. We are a brand new organization that's just sort of formed in the last couple of years. The history is longer. I don't have time to go into all of it, but in the last, between June and October, Circle has taken over ownership of over 550 properties from Toronto Community Housing Corporation. So for those not from Toronto, that's the City of Toronto's public housing provider. And most of these homes, so it's 586 units total that we've taken ownership of in the last 6 months. And they're scattered all over Toronto. So you can go to the next slide and see a map of where our housing is. So if you don't know Toronto, I can tell you that what you can see on this map is a very significant coverage of like the formal boundaries of the city. So Circle's housing is scattered all over, and each of those little markers most of them are a single family home. Some of them are small multi-unit buildings, like triplex, maybe 6 units at the most. And you can see they're mostly clustered in the East End and through Scarborough. So if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to kind of do close-ups just to really see, the next slide. So this is previous slide. I think there was just a lag. Thanks. One more back. There we go. So this is the kind of downtown east cluster, the yellows and greens. So each of those is a single family home in the kind of downtown east of Toronto. And then the next slide is our Malvern properties. So you can see like Malvern East and West, a lot of homes there as well. And then the final slide I wanted to share shows the homes in Scarborough. So south of 401, north of Kingston Road, sort of like right on the border with East York and over to Orton Park. So we have a lot of housing all of a sudden. Most of the units, the vast majority are rent geared to income, so deeply affordable. This was the case when they were owned by Toronto Community Housing, and it's remaining the case with us. So the majority of tenants are receiving rent subsidies from the city. So it's been a really fast ramp up. It's been a pretty intense learning experience at times. We've only had staff since February, and now we own all these properties. So it's really cool. Like it's a really amazing thing to have so many of these homes that were, and I hope I'll have a chance to explain later, we're under threat of sale for a really long time, sort of permanently affordable. That's a really exciting thing, but it's also our scale is also a challenge. The homes are really spread out, and it makes engagement a very different situation than if we're a neighborhood land trust that kind of grows out of a local movement, and grows gradually. So that's a really active challenge for us. And I guess the other thing I wanted to highlight beyond that is that not all CLTs operate their housing, but Circle, for various reasons that kind of it became clear through the process of moving towards acquiring these homes, that it made sense for Circle to actually be the housing operator and property manager as well. So we're the landowner, but we also have an in-house maintenance team and kind of tenancy services staff. And so it's cool because it means that we can weave our values and intentions through everything we're doing. But also what we're experiencing at this early stage is there's a lot of competing priorities when you're doing everything yourself, and you have a lot. We have a lot on our plates. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and then the Neighborhood Land Trust, it's an important part of their work as well, that they've taken on a lot of these homes from Toronto Community Housing in the West End. And I guess the other thing that's interesting about this moment we're in right now is that we've been able to raise money to actually bring all the homes into a state of good repair. So a lot of these homes, because they're spread out, because each one is different, haven't necessarily been well taken care of by Toronto Community Housing. And so one of our massive tasks over the next number of years is to bring all these homes into a state of good repair, which we're beginning to work on, but it's going to be a big one. So yeah, I can share more about what we're doing later on, but that's the summary for now. So thank you.
No slide.
Yeah, I think you're okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dane Williams. I am with Blackburners, Black Urbanism Toronto. Unfortunately, we do not have slides today, so my apologies, but hopefully I could speak about the organization and just provide guidance on the work that we're currently doing. So I think the most important thing is maybe to kind of start off with the history of where we're operating. We're currently operating in Little Jamaica. If you're not familiar with Little Jamaica, it's, we designated as from Marley and Eglinton to Keele and Eglinton. And others may have other conversations around Lawrence Heights and Oakwood and Vaughan, and it actually extending potentially or, identifying previously Bathurst and Bloor with Blackhurst and the history there. But for us, our main kind of, where we're situated is right at the heart of Oakwood and Eglinton. So for the history of Little Jamaica, not sure if anyone's familiar with some of the history, but between 1955 to like 1960s, there was a large migration of Black women, caregivers, who migrated to the area. They were support workers. And, obviously, they were foundational in the migration of, Jamaicans and Caribbean people as a whole to the city of Toronto through that caregiver program. So just kind of want to shout out to, Black Caribbean women who basically foundationally built that bridge from the Caribbeans to the city of Toronto. And it's not really recognized, the things that they had to face in order to, be able to support their families and in seeking a better life for their families. So kind of that's the development of Little Jamaica, and similar to my grandma was a part of that program. And soon after she was able to bring over my uncle and my mother. And just kind of tying in, speaking to some of the history of Little Jamaica, it was also the epicenter of reggae music. So it was the second largest reggae producing area next to Kingston, Jamaica. So a lot of famous reggae artists, Bob Marley, other ones that Jess, who's here, could probably speak to more than I can, immigrated and recorded in Little Jamaica, which also speaks to why that hasn't been celebrated and a part of Canadian history, right? Like something so instrumental and world-renowned not being celebrated, it was something that, again, we spoke to and we thought of. So currently we're operating out of 1061 Eglinton West Avenue. We have a physical space there. And we're working with community on commercial land trusts. So we're mainly focused on supporting Black commercial business owners. The work situated and was started out of our work with the City of Toronto and the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. We issued in February 2020, which seems like such a long time ago, we issued a Black Business Conversation report through a 2-day consultation series where we discussed, some of the issues and concerns and lack of support that the Black business owners face in Little Jamaica. A lot of the conversations were Metrolinks, as you know, BIAs and lack of support, but there was a consistent theme of lack of ownership and being able to dictate the terms and demands of the neighborhood. What was happening is, displacement not only was exacerbated through Metrolinks and then COVID, but it was also just, being leasing spaces and not being owners of your space really gives the ability for the power to landlords, as opposed to the business owners. And that was the topic of conversation. So for us, I think what we did through the Black Business Conversation is we issued out some recommendations, and one of the recommendations was looking at land ownership and how we can support and have more stability within our community, and then as well speak to how we want the growth of our community to look like. Like we're seeing the ever-changing of Little Jamaica, and it's for the community members, it's been very difficult to see something happen where they have no power or control or say in the change of their community. So we've worked very closely with a number of great partners to really look at community wealth building models, the different community wealth building models, commercial land trusts, and how we can leverage those opportunities to provide affordable business ownership spaces, which also tied into the affordable housing piece with those commercial properties being mixed use and having residents on top of those commercial spaces. We're now looking at affordable housing and also food sovereignty as specific topics as well. We understand that land holds so much power in creating space, creating comfort, creating discussions, especially within the cultural nuances of African Caribbean people. We like visiting the barbershop is an experience. Visiting the hair salon is an experience. And it's not only to pay for those services, but it's really about the conversation and the exchange of knowledge in those spaces. So, and that's really one of the reasons why we targeted businesses first, is because for Black people, those conversations hold so much power. And if there aren't spaces where we're able to be unapologetically ourselves, then it erases that ability of cultural exchange and knowledge. So for us, we saw the importance of and really saw the business owners as the key to community engagement and interaction. Just because, again, throughout the City of Toronto, there isn't really any spaces where Black people can meet and congregate and converse and discuss as community. So currently what we're looking at is different affordable measures for business owners to own their space. We've convened and we're really focused on providing, being a median to providing information to the business owners to support them. They're working so hard to just make ends meet. They don't necessarily have the time to be able to access those informations and those resources. So we look at ourselves as a median to be able to provide access and help support and facilitate those ownership mechanisms. And we're really having a really great discussion around shared ownership models and business owners working together, which is something that within the neighborhood has been difficult because there's been fragmented relationships, disconnect. Again, I think from a cultural nuance perspective, if there's different cultural nuances within the Caribbeans as well. and within those countries. So it's about how do we join and look at ourselves as one and as one community, as opposed to being fragmented based off of our separate environments or and those things. So we're really focused on building that opportunity, but I think one of the things that make us a little bit different is that we're really focused on, as well as like health justice and ensuring that our internal traumas and past kind of again going through the neighborhood, like not having the support as being Black business owners, not having access to BIA resources, and just really building out and understanding those traumas and those ill feelings. Like a lot of the business owners they're tired, they're upset, they're angry, and they've been really disengaged. And I think the best thing through this project is that we've seen we've seen resiliency, and we've seen them see the light at the end of the tunnel, see a glimmer of hope, and being really interested in participating and engaging with us through this process. So, for us, we're hoping to learn off everyone here today, and hopefully in the near future, work together to collectively own a space.
What a wonderful first round of discussions. It's always inspiring to hear your stories, and I always got inspired. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. And also, I hope now we have a bigger picture of what is going on in Toronto when it comes to community land trust movements. So we're gonna get into a little bit more details as a follow-up questions. The next question is, what are some of the pressing and concrete issues you've been working on, and could you share some of your strategies and some conditions of possibility if you're achieving some of the kind of tractions? And then for this round, if you can keep your answers a little shorter, that'll be amazing. So maybe I will start with over here.
No, I just came on a conversation. Hi, I'm Kevin Barrett, Dominique's co-chair of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. Excuse me. As Dominique told you, we bought our first building about a year and a half ago after a quite mind-boggling kind of flurry of activity, which is a story in and of itself. In terms of challenges that we face at the moment, a lot of them stem from that. So first of all, we were suddenly, as a small, very young, community-based nonprofit organization with half a dozen or so people on a board of directors, suddenly owning and managing a 12 residential and 5 commercial unit building in the heart of Toronto. So a lot of just day-to-day challenges about making that happen, working with the tenants, trying to practice and put into place some of the values we espouse in terms of economic and racial justice in our community and inclusion. So that comes up right from the beginning. So very shortly after we acquired the building, there's a vacancy, a vacant unit, and suddenly we're faced with the question about how do we establish some principles by which we select a tenant for that very highly coveted affordable unit in the building. How do we deal with a building that's aging and has challenged with building systems, navigating the range of funding opportunities and funding challenges to pay for those kind of things, and also I would say more recently just some of the growing pains that a small neighborhood-based organization like ours can face. So conflicts around principles within the board of directors, trying to keep a board of directors together where everyone is on the same page when you want to talk about vaccination and mask policies and in-person meetings, for example, just something that exploded on us in a way that we didn't see coming recently. So lots of those kind of very, sometimes mundane, but very real day-to-day challenges in terms of the life of the organization and the challenge of managing a medium-sized building in downtown Toronto are a lot of the things that occupy our day-to-day existence at the moment. At the same time, we're working really hard at trying to keep a vision on acquiring more land. The whole point of our organization is to take land out of the commercial real estate market within Kensington and hold it for community good. And in a real estate market like we operate in now, it's enormously challenging. It's enormously challenging to be nimble and quick on your feet that you need to be to compete with the people who are buying multi-million-dollar buildings. There's been some exciting developments recently in the city of Toronto. Huge thanks in particular to Parkdale and Josh working with the city to establish a new program called the Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program that we're very excited about and hope to see expanding. But in very practical terms, being able to get our hands on several $100,000 at the drop of a, what's the expression I mean? The turn of a, turning on a dime to get access to that kind of capital when a building comes for sale, to be able to put in an offer and tie it up for 4 or 6 weeks so that we can try to put financing together. I mean, big organizations that have lots of assets can move very quickly like that. A small organization like ours, with both its internal challenges and the fact that we don't have millions of dollars of leverageable assets in the bank yet, we will one day, but we don't yet, makes it really hard. So there's some examples of what we're working on.
I just want to add one thing, because I talked about the parking lot. So what keeps me up at night, and literally because I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning in a cold sweat, because we have a new city councillor. One of the issues I think we'll be facing is the turnover in city councillors. One aspect of our land trust is the idea of sort of being custodians of this historical place, this important place that has a particular feel. And we are waiting for the request for proposal from the city to drop, and we were watching interest rates go up, and we are also watching a kind of rhetoric that is very much about build, 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 while we're hemorrhaging affordability. But that waiting period, I think, is something that's there for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by saying that when I talk about the Toronto Chinatown, like our area of focus for the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust is West Chinatown, which is the one that's based around Spadina. There's an East Chinatown, and yeah, we don't do so much work there. There's also Chinatowns around the GTA, but for us, one of the important parts about West Chinatown is that it is the Chinatown that was displaced from where City Hall currently is. So there used to be a Chinatown where City Hall was. It was expropriated by the city and demolished, and basically all the Chinese businesses had to move. I think what Dane said about commercial spaces is really important as places of community, and for people who are newcomers to Canada who have just migrated here and don't speak English, Chinatown is this enormous resource. So I think one of the major challenges, like clearly, and I think everyone, all of the land trusts, this is why we exist, is the gentrification and displacement of businesses and tenants in Chinatown. And one of the things that we're facing is land assembly. So developers buying up entire blocks of Chinatown and making condos. And because Spadina is a major boulevard, due to the zoning that's imposed by the city, developers have the ability to build enormous condo buildings that are over 12 stories, and that's what's happening at 315 Spadina. And I guess one of the other challenges is that the city that we encountered when we first started opposing the development at 315 was the city didn't even have a recognition of Chinatown as a specific neighborhood. Right? Like they were like, oh, you're like Spadina. This is Spadina Street or Avenue or whatever. And they just didn't recognize it. And the signs that they put up in the neighborhood were all in English, and all of their consultation processes are in English. And And so that is something that we're really working hard for, against. You know, it's one of the conditions that we have to fight against. And I think going off of that, one of the challenges for us as a land trust is being able to engage community members in multiple languages, because Chinatown is not monolithic. There's a historic kind of Cantonese speaking community, but now many people speak Mandarin, and there are also Vietnamese speaking folks, and lots of folks who don't speak English, period. Like, that's why they live in Chinatown. So one of our major things that we need to work towards is how to engage people in all of these languages and have meetings and be able to communicate and make decisions, in multiple languages and in recognition of all the different communities that make up Chinatown.
Yeah, for us quickly, I think one of the things that we've assessed through our consultation with business owners is around like community land trusts, and then and them wrapping their heads around that, but also being interested in like investment and investment properties, and how do we merge those two? Because again, like within our community, what we're thinking about when we think about land ownership is leveraging land for equity to then be able to purchase more buildings. And again, because of there's been like a fragmented community, and there's less of a relationship with, you know, business owners within the community, it's more so about like individual ownership and investment models, as opposed to community wealth building models. And what we're trying to figure out is how do we merge those two components, understanding the fact of them wanting to leverage that equity or leveraging that ownership piece, but also maintaining affordability, and holding, land, holding those commercial spaces for affordable ownership. I mean, and I think that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to figure out as well, and it's really an issue. And number two, I think for us is how we've tried to kind of work on that is, for us as an organization, we've really spent a lot of time since 2018 really building those relationships and building trust with business owners, to the point where when we were doing consultations and having discussions with business owners, they were really interested in sharing all their information and their history and their stories, and why we are where we are today. So it's been a really great build up from 2018 to current. And there's been a really, really good trust being built to the point where when commercial spaces go up for sale, they're actually reaching out to us and saying, how are we able to move quickly? And I think one of our concerns is kind of what was acknowledged there is how do we at a drop of a dime now pull our resources together to purchase the buildings? And that's what we're hoping, that's what we're going to be discussing in 3 weeks from now. Is really talking about putting our resources within community and purchasing buildings, buying buildings back as community. And is there an opportunity for that fractional ownership model, and individuals, and using our community economic, our economy to be able to, as community, based off numbers, purchase our buildings based off, multiple participants as opposed to one, and is there a potential opportunity to creating that entity? So those are some of the discussions we're having currently.
Homeownership, okay. So I want to talk about that, but then I wouldn't be talking about our work. So when we got going, there were some pressing crises occurring back in 2014 and 2015 in Parkdale. There were a number of community groups coming together to try to figure out what to do about those issues. Much of it was brought together in part by actually Cooney and other community organizers who were doing community planning. And that community planning was focused on identifying strategies for equitable development, looking at how we could produce decent work in the community, and push back against the general forces of gentrification. One of the things that was identified in that planning, which would bring together residents in these sort of thematic discussions about particular issues like housing needs, food security, and things like that. One of the things that came forward was a trend of rooming house loss and evictions of tenants from rooming houses. And we kept hearing about these evictions, and people would know, oh yeah, like Johnny got evicted from that site got shut down. But there'd be these flashpoints, and it wasn't clear what exactly was happening. We knew it was linked to what was happening with the market, but we didn't know the extent of the problem and truly what was going on. And so we were a new organization focused on land and housing, and so we thought, well, let's take this on as our issue for a bit, Rooming houses are the most affordable form of rental housing in the community that's privately owned, and it's a big stock, and the people who live in rooming houses, are some of the lower income residents. So, focusing our energy there felt like a good first step. And so that led us to sort of discover some strategies that we think are just generally useful in community land trust organizing. So the first thing is you actually do need to get to know a local real estate submarket to be able to intervene in that real estate submarket. And we decided to do that through community-based action research. So we hired a planner. So I know there's a lot of planners in the room. You guys can be helpful too. But we also had to hire tenants, rooming house tenants, because the planners, people don't trust planners. And also the planners don't live in the rooming houses, so they don't actually know what's going on in the rooming houses. So we hired tenants too, and we went to every building in the neighborhood, door to door, and spoke to whoever would speak to us. And we learned a lot. First off, we learned that there were 198 rooming houses and bachelorette buildings, and only about half of those were known by the city as licensed sites. We figured out that the housing stock and the rooming house stock was bigger than, there were more units in that stock privately owned than affordable housing units owned by all social housing providers in the community, including Toronto Community Housing. So what that meant was that if that stock was under pressure, if people were being pushed out of that stock, a large population of extremely low-income people were at risk of losing their housing. And since the city didn't know that that stock was that big, and none of us truly knew that that stock was that big, we didn't understand how big the problem was, and we weren't mounting a response that was as big as it needed to be, right? As substantial as it needed to be. It was 2,700 units, potentially 2,700 people, assuming only one person per room or unit. And so we documented this, we documented that. That was the first thing, just to know what exists. Often, the municipalities don't even know what exists, and they don't look into certain things that exist because they don't want to have to deal with that problem. They don't want to have to be responsible to respond to poor people's crises in these buildings. They don't look at it because then they don't have to, be accountable to that. But if we get that information, we can actually work with our community to respond, but also in the case of this situation, we were able to share it with the city, and the city was happy to get that information. So studying the market was important. We also identified what the problem was. Yes, there was just general gentrification, but there was a specific thing happening in the submarket. So the older landlords who had purchased in the 70s and were able to provide affordable rents were retiring. They're old. Their kids didn't want to run low-income rental buildings, and so they were selling their buildings. And guess who wants to buy a building today, 2015? Investors. And investors didn't want to provide affordable rents. And so, what we realized is actually there's not succession plans for these buildings. And so there's a productive thing we as a community can do, is we can plan for the succession of these homes so they can go to operators, ideally the community as an operator, as an owner, to make sure the buildings stay affordable, that they're improved so people can live in dignified housing. And so that's what we've done since. So we use community action research to study a submarket, identify the problem, name community-led housing solutions, and then we use the research to convince government to mobilize our community around a common objective. And in our case, it's preserving the affordable rooming houses in our community. And so out of that research, we were able to change some policy. We were able to get a housing program created that would support that. And we eventually undertook a pilot project, which is our second strategy. Is when you figure out a solution, you have to test it, because no one wants to give you a lot of money. Like, these things need a lot of money, but no one wants to give you a lot of money until you've proven it'll work and that you can do it and that you're willing to go through the struggle of it. So we did a pilot project. We proved that it worked, and then now we're continuing to replicate that project. And we're pretty lucky. We have Gord here. We're pretty lucky that we have a counselor in the neighborhood who was able to listen to the narrative that the community brought, the information we brought, responded and created a funding for a pilot program, and then worked with us since then to ensure that the pilot program has turned into a long-term funding program, which is the MURA program, Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program. So now this is funding that other communities and other organizations in our community as well can access to purchase buildings that are at risk and bring them into nonprofit ownership. So just I want to try to synthesize it back. You engage community through planning to identify the needs. You undertake research to figure out what's actually going on, get the right information, name the problem. You identify community-led action strategies. You do a pilot to prove it can work, and then you scale and keep doing that to make sure that your community actually gets the impact they deserve.
I'm actually so glad to speak after Josh sort of shared that 5-point plan, because Circle Community Land Trust is an interesting case, because Circle is the biggest community land trust being represented at this event, but it's my personal view that we wouldn't exist at all if it wasn't for the momentum that has been built by this current generation of community land trusts. So Circle's housing has been affordable for a really long time. The city of Toronto bought it over many decades and miraculously ran single family homes as subsidized housing. It's amazing. They're totally irreplaceable in the current affordable housing context, and especially in the market that we're in right now. But while they've been affordable for a long time, their future has really been uncertain, and they were almost sold, all of them, about 10 years ago, and some were actually sold, about 100, I believe. And the rest were saved, but there was kind of no next step. So for the last 10 years, there's been a real uncertainty about the future of these homes. And so, there's a long story of how, how the transfer of these homes happened from Toronto Community Housing to the land trusts that now own them. So the majority being with Circle Land Trust, and then a smaller but significant group being with the Neighborhood Land Trust, which is related to the Parkdale Land Trust. And so I guess, so the big challenge that we've been going through as Circle is basically just navigating this huge transfer of properties. And we have so many plans for the future, but really right now, it's just about getting through this. And so, what Circle represents is permanent affordability for these homes and bringing them into a state of good repair. The dignified housing that Josh was talking about is so important to us. And we know from the tenants that it's really, really important to them. But I'm glad to, have had the other CLTs speak first, because, so how did this happen? The number one reason is the tenants themselves. So the tenants of what we call them the scatter homes. So the TCHC scatter homes are really responsible for this transfer. There was a long period of advocacy over many years, tenants organizing amongst themselves, getting their message out in the media, a lot of deputing at City Hall. I'm sure a lot of us have deputed at times about affordable housing in the city. And in particular, a group called Tenants for Social Housing. And they were also instrumental in advising Circle's founders about how to set this organization up. Another thing that sort of allowed this to happen is the dedication of, some leaders from the affordable housing sector, some of whom helped found Circle, some of whom are still involved, and their belief that that it would be worthwhile to save these homes as rent geared to income housing, even though running single family homes scattered all over the city is very expensive and really difficult logistically. But they're great to live in. It's an amazing thing to provide, 3, 4, sometimes 5 bedroom homes in neighborhoods to families, to groups of roommates. We have a lot of multi-generational families living in our homes, which is an amazing thing. And that there was this commitment to that idea. And then the third piece that I really feel personally is that even though Circle is all of a sudden this big organization and has a lot of really strong leaders behind it that have many years of experience collectively, I personally feel that the current generation of CLTs, the really amazing victories that have been won, the groundswell of support around all of these groups at all the different stages that they're at, has really made like CLTs relevant in the city right now. And I think was a big reason why the city of Toronto could get behind the idea of transferring hundreds of these homes to a brand new community land trust that came into existence to do specifically this. So, we're just at the beginning, and there's so much to learn from all the organizing and advocacy that's happened, both with our tenants and also with the CLTs here. So that's lots more work to do, but that's where we're at. Thanks.
At the current conjuncture, community land trust is gaining attention as a promising approach to pursue racial justice and decolonizations, given the kind of shared struggle over the land. It is really exciting and promising, but also we know it is really challenging at the same time. So the next question is, if you can share some of the organizational practices and organizing effort that you are building to advance these anti-racist and decolonial objectives. And if you can even share some of the insight and lessons that you gain from this, effort, that would be also great. And we don't have to take this time a turn. If you like to just go on, just please go on. And also you can also share some of the challenges and questions that you'd like to discuss as well. Should we go take a turn?
I'll say so one of the challenges I think is to bring in engagement, and Kensington Market is 50% Chinese, and we do not have that representation, and we're working towards it, but there are real gaps there. One thing that I absolutely found just blew me out of the water was the campaign that you did with just having things translated from the city, and we were, we've been like, how do we, and you just do it. So it's a challenge to engage people. When I said, we had everybody and have these community meetings and, let's think about the land trust, let's figure out the land trust. And people are just like, just go do it. Leave us alone. Come back when you've got it done. And so that challenge of engagement, but I think, there is a path. There's things that we can see that we need to do. And if we're successful in acquiring land, then that engagement will come. So I think there's an element whereby it's always a work in progress. We talked about the Access Committee and sort of that. And I was amazed at how these are really difficult questions to they're very concrete. There's one unit, there's all these people. How do you figure that out? And I was really impressed by the way in which it was, wrestled with I don't say like, everyone was so careful with one another. And we have on our board and on that committee, Reverend Maggie Helwig, who has a kind of compass And she is so close to the most vulnerable in the community, and I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by other examples, and I think we just keep trying.
Yeah, I think like building off of what you said about language, like for us in Chinatown, there's the issue of language, obviously, which is this enormous barrier, but there's also an issue of political education, right, or like ideology. And I think that in terms of the question of decolonization, like, you know, lots of newcomers to Canada from China or from other places in East or Southeast Asia don't necessarily have an understanding of what that is and what it means and why it's important. I mean, even within China, there's issues of settler colonialism, right, with like Han Chinese and different minorities. And so I think that's one of the things that we really want to focus on in our work as a CLT, is to educate around land back and the fact that we're on stolen land. And I think that's really important. And I think one of the other issues is that in Chinatown, or like in the Chinese community, there's in general maybe more like access to home ownership than in other racialized communities. Maybe I mean, I'm not a scientist or a historian, but maybe in part due to the mutual aid societies and stuff. And so for us, like, you know, I think it's important for us to also keep our work focused on tenants and workers instead of the idea of home ownership, because, yeah, it's a stereotype, right? Like Chinese people buy real estate, and it is both true and also not true. Like it's not, yeah, it's completely uneven. But that's something else that we want to keep in mind in terms of the land back and decolonization issue.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, first off, I think removing land from the private ownership, like from private ownership and from the market, and bringing it into collective forms of ownership is potentially an important part of decolonization and that process, potentially, you know, because it can provide like means to ensure access to housing and other important spaces for, you know, BIPOC communities and other equity deserving communities. It can minimize the extraction of wealth from our communities. It can be a platform for collective decision making and the exercising of self-determination. And it also, like, I think most of us are doing this because we're not just concerned about ourselves, right? Like, we're quite concerned about what happens next and making sure that there's housing for many generations and our communities can be livable for many generations forward. So it you know, this can be part of, I think, the process of decolonization, but it's not guaranteed. You know, like, we are purchasing property and we have title, and we can exercise that, you know, that stewardship privilege in I think in unethical ways, in ways that would go against those values. And so I think we have to be very mindful about seeking to grow good practice around the stewardship of the important assets that we become collective owners of, right? And I guess in my mind, there's some like practical things to do. Like, we need to think very critically about our community governance models. How do we ensure that there is true, you know, a democratic process, that we're building leadership that is diverse, that represents the community in its many formations, and its, you know, I think that, you know, we obviously have to recognize too, like, BIPOC residents have historically been, you know, disproportionately impacted by all the issues we're talking about tonight. And so we have the power to, when we own the buildings, to prioritize access to those assets moving forward to BIPOC community members where possible. There's challenges in that when working with the city. I'll just acknowledge, you know, when getting funding from the city, generally we have to agree to work with the city's waiting lists. And so having certain types of So developing strategies around ensuring access for particular groups can be challenging, or for people from particular identities can be challenging. So not that it's impossible to work through, but there's some real challenges there, I'll be honest. There's other things we can do too, like when we become owners of property, we have to make decisions about how the money flowing through those properties is used. People are hired to maintain the buildings, to work in the buildings. We have to hire contractors, and I think we can exercise our privileged authority to make decisions about the use of that money to also, to address racial injustices in our community, to invest in BIPOC-owned businesses, cooperative businesses, and initiatives that will support those communities moving forward. So we have to make sure that it's not just the housing, it's not just the business, but it's all the money, how the money circulates through our community, and how we can, at every sort of point of that process, make a decision that tries to address racial inequalities historically and potentially contribute to decolonization. I don't know what all those things are, but I think that there's a lot of opportunities if we keep sort of identifying those moments where we have a decision to make, and we try to make that decision from a good value point. Yeah.
Ivy, I saw your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit more about, some things Josh was sort of alluding to about working with the city, and I think just working with, public funding more generally. One of the things that's been interesting for me, working with Circle Land Trust now, is that, so the vast majority of our tenants are receiving rent geared to income subsidies from the city of Toronto, which is an incredible resource for them, and it allows us to exist, and it allows us to, that's the money, that's our operating money, and it's an amazing thing. But of course, it also puts all kinds of restrictions on what we can do and how we can do it. And it's been a strange experience, I think, to kind of, be at once approaching this, with these values of engagement, these values of housing justice, of inclusion, of anti-oppression, but then also kind of having to sort of be, by virtue of the fact that from where our funding comes from, be a kind of, be the face of the government regulations, and having to sort of base everything around it, and I don't want to say defend it, but sort of represent it publicly and to our tenants specifically. And that's been a challenge I've found, sort of wanting to relate to our tenants authentically, but also having all of these rules. And so Josh is talking about access. So in order to receive rent geared to income subsidies, there's a lot of rules about who gets units. So it's interesting to hear Kensington Land Trust talk about just having your own principles for who gets a vacant unit, where when we're receiving funding from the city, we don't really get a lot of choice in that. And we know there are so many people in need. So these units are never going to anyone who doesn't need it. The waiting lists are, what is it? It's like 8 to 10 years right now. But I think that, that's been a real challenge to have these values, but then be very restricted by these, the realities of where our funding is coming from, and what we're allowed to do within that framework. So, I mean, I don't think there's a clear answer for it yet, but I do think that, one of the things that for me feels good about being part of, like a movement like the CLT movement, is our collective ability to try and push for different things, to try and imagine, new policies, and how we can kind of push for them together, so that we might be freer to, put our values into practice, and still have access to this like really, life-giving funding that we have access to right now. So.
Yeah, for us quickly, I think one of the things that we've been discussing is just understanding the relationship of land and its deep connection to the Indigenous community. For us, like we're very much in the planning stage, And we're trying to figure out how those two things, how land ownership and engaging indigenous communities, how those things align. I think one of the things that we have been discussing and suggestion is, visiting a reserve and speaking to the chief and the elders and understanding, from an indigenous perspective, how, they envision land use as a community, and also understanding that the indigenous community had a thriving economy of understanding how to use land and how to use resources appropriately, and how can we take that and implement it potentially into the way we re-envision the use of these business spaces. I think we're trying to figure out how we genuinely engage those discussions and having indigenous communities at the forefront as originators of this land, because I think one of the things that we are seeing as problematic as occupants of the land is that, we're building these community wealth building models without taking those things into consideration. And it's also too, it's kind of a little bit tricky because the same system that we're fighting, we're kind of recreating into our own systematic hierarchy. And I think for us, we're slow to, we're really trying to be thoughtful in how those two things align, and where, because again, in a lot of this work you see, and I totally understand, but you see well, you'll see a hiring of an indigenous consultant, and you'll have a conversation, but then you look at it from even just a funding perspective. It's okay, you were given $100,000, let's say, for this project, and then there's a specific portion that you've allocated for an indigenous consultant, when that should really be at the forefront of the conversation. So we're trying to figure out how all those things align, and just thinking about the economy of scale, how is the indigenous community able to, or not able to, they should be participating in these conversations, and they should be a part of these land ownership conversations. So we're just trying to figure out as an organization, how do we align those conversations, and where do we see that those things kind of engaging. So that's kind of, I think for us, that's at the pinnacle of decolonization and anti-racism and all those components. And I think we're thinking what we want is to really see their way of life and their way of thinking, and meet them where they are, to then understand how we can incorporate that thought process into our land ownership.
I did want to just put into the space that recently there has been an initiative that's being initiated by a local person in Parkdale, who's a member of our board, but who also is initiating a woman-led Indigenous Community Land Trust in Toronto. So, I just want to put it in the air that there are Indigenous people working on having similar conversations, but different conversations as well. And that I do believe that we'll see those initiatives move forward at the pace that they will. And we should, of course, support and learn from those initiatives as much as we can. I just want to make sure people are aware of that, because you said, those organizations, those folks should be here, and I think in other moments, hopefully we'll have those opportunities.
Okay, so this is the last questions before we open up to the Q&As, because we are close to the end. And this last questions, you have 45 seconds to respond. And then that question is very normative questions. And then this is one of the questions that I'm really, really interested to hear more is, what does the community land trust mean to your communities in your neighborhood? 45 seconds.
Hope, for better or for worse. Yeah, that's my answer. For 45 seconds, that would be my answer. It's the hope that people have that they can stay in the community, and that hope always comes with responsibility and fear, I think, for the organization, you know. But I think that there is a sense that the land trust represents hope in being able to keep people in their homes, in being able to stay in the community, to balance out, bring more people into a residential community that more and more is becoming a sort of a nightclub district. It's the hope of being able to preserve it, to pass down what we have benefited from, this beautiful mix, it's eclectic mix of incomes and people and newcomers, and the hope that can continue.
Yeah, I guess I think for the Chinatown Land Trust, like, oh my gosh, I have to summarize me in 45 seconds, but I think to be able to support and recognize the community that already exists in Chinatown, which is one that of mutual aid, and that's historically what it's been, and to be able to grow more communities through the work of the Land Trust.
Winning in concrete, lasting ways.
I think for our community it would be like a sense of belonging, a sense of hope. I think that was really great, and a sense of belongingness. I think it would community would be hopeful, and they would see that like this is a true avenue where Black people can thrive and prosper in the city of Toronto.
And I would just say, so for our community, that would be our tenants all over the city. And I think that what Circle represents to them, for those who know who we are yet, we definitely have tenants who don't necessarily know that their home has a new owner yet. But for those that know, it would be security. So these homes have been under threat for a really long time, have had an uncertain future, and they're now, they're not just affordable for 10 years, they're permanently affordable, held by the Land Trust, and that's a really big deal.
Thank you so much, Joel, and then sorry for asking 45 seconds limits, but it went well. Now, the floor is open. So if you have questions, please come up to the mic over there, and then please, oh. And then please state your name and then affiliation if you have.
Can you hear me? I don't think I need a mic. Oh yeah, for them. Okay. My name's Aurelia Gannon, and I'm with Friends of Dufferin Grove Park, building a better Bloor Dufferin, and our newly formed, as of May 2022, Community Cultural Spaces Land Trust. And when you were talking about displaced people, I thought, if you're living in Toronto, think of a fabulous neighborhood that used to be awesome, and think about the artists that made it awesome, that were displaced and made those areas more gentrifiable. And I'm very, very pleased that we have this very newly formed. I have new business cards, and we have a new website that I can send to whoever's wanted. So I didn't really have a question, but I did want to think about the artists in our midst, because that's one of our mandates, to think about artists who have been displaced disproportionately and who are, we used to have music venues and studio spaces and rehearsal spaces and fabulous living, and if you go to the AGO and you see a fabulous painting that takes up the side of a wall, and you think, what artist can afford the space to paint something of that magnitude? And in other cities, artists are given better accommodation. So anybody who wants to know, I have business cards.
Thank you.
There was a request for your website as well.
Yeah, it is. It is. Community cult. Wait. It's new. It's less than a week old. It's like, I have it on my phone. I'll have to. Oh yeah, here it is. Community. Oh no, I can't read it.
Maybe put on a chat.
So yeah, someone shared it.
If anybody else have a question, please come up over here.
It is community. Say it again.
CommunityCulturalSpacesTrust.ca.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Jess, just a community member bumping around. I had a question. A lot of us in this room are very familiar with Toronto Community Housing's history of, violent policing. And I'm curious, especially on the topic of, racial justice, for those of you who are taking over TCHC properties, and receiving funding from the city, are you beholden to TCHC policies of kind of management, and would you be releasing, maybe your kind of like property management guidelines? I know a lot of you are really young and maybe you're still figuring it out, but I think it would be really helpful for people to have that transparency and also to learn from it.
Great, thank you. Ivy or Josh?
Yeah, so to be clear, we are, we've taken over these properties from TCHC, but the transfers were there was like this long period where the transfers were in process and it wasn't, we didn't know if they were going to happen, but it's mostly done now. So they are owned by the CLT now. So it's our rules. The rules I was speaking about before are more related to like getting the funding, and their rules around tenancy and access to vacant units, and sort of how you maintain your tenancy. I can't really speak, like we are very, very new in every sense. We're a brand new organization, and we've taken over so many units of housing in such a short time. We don't have the kind of security infrastructure that TCHC has, and definitely used in our neighborhoods. And we're still in the early stages of figuring out what all those relationships are going to look like. But that's good to hear actually about like thinking about releasing those strategies. They're definitely not developed yet, but that's something that we definitely would consider. Yes. I don't know, Josh, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah. So our land trust took ownership of 81 homes that were transferred from Toronto Community Housing, like another bundle of properties similar to their portfolio, and we don't. Like they undertake property management, but our land trust doesn't do property management. We own the properties. We do asset management, which is like we do the large renovations and capital repairs, and we involve the tenants in governance and decision making and advising on us. But we have a housing operator who provides the property management and other tenant services. And for those homes, it's the YWCA Toronto. And so they have their own property management department and policies. So one thing I can say is we don't have security for those properties. Like we don't have security guards or anything like that. And so like that's as much as I know. I guess I'd love to have a conversation with you after to learn more about specifically what you think would be helpful to like make public or available, because I think we're very comfortable with those types of requests, and like I'd just like to learn more. The last thing I'll just say is that like we do have buildings in Parkdale where like large rental buildings, like a 36 unit building and a 15 unit building, where security is an issue. Tenants do experience threats of violence from other community members or other tenants, and so there's been incidents of violence, and so we have had like the beginnings of pretty complicated conversations with tenants about what we can do to make people feel safe. And in those buildings, there are security companies that come in the night just to check on the building to make sure that to just like walk through the building, like so there is security going to those buildings. Those buildings are operated by Park, and Park is a supportive housing operator. So over its years has decided that it needed to have some security services that it utilizes. What I can say is like we're in active conversations with tenants about their different perspectives on the level of security and that they feel comfortable with and that they feel will work in their buildings. And we try to make opportunities for those discussions to happen, and then it's our responsibility to basically bring it back and write policy and change policy if it needs to get changed. So I don't know, maybe we can have a chat after, because it sounds like a good suggestion.
Any other questions from the floor? Maybe one question from, I think, Anna, you said there's a question in the chat box. Can you mention the question, please? Great question.
I'll take a run. I mean, at the first one, I mean, good question. I mean, I've worked in the affordable housing sector on and off for a number of decades, and it's interesting the way governments come and go. Certainly community land trusts have got a fair bit of political currency at the moment, and certainly the City of Toronto has taken some really significant initiative to provide funding, which has been great. Kensington Market Community Land Trust owns our building. We would not own our building without a substantial input of capital from the City of Toronto. To contrast that with the province of Ontario, which is absolutely absent from funding of affordable housing programs at this point. One of the things that we're undertaking at the Kensington Market Community Land Trust at the moment is looking at a community investment strategy. So trying to get away from government funding, and again, in the same way I talked earlier about competing with, I didn't use this term, but competing with the big boys in the real estate market, trying to play in that game. Look at the way that investment vehicles work to support the REITs that have been eating up affordable housing around the city for 10 years. How do we take advantage of a similar approach? So we are about to launch a community bond campaign to try to provide a vehicle whereby people, there's people all across the city and all across the country who love our neighborhood and want to support it. And some of those people have got a lot of resources and some don't, and some have very little bits. But how do we enable people to make financial investments in that neighborhood to support this work in a way that will give us the kind of capital base that we need to pay our mortgage and pursue additional acquisitions? So just as one example of funding outside of the city, I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about exploring the ways that we structure that community investment strategy in a way that's accessible to a lot of people and begins to provide a very real, concrete, monetary base to support the work that we're doing.
I was going to walk over. Thanks. Yeah, totally, 100%. And I think that's some of the discussions that we're having as a community as well. And I think it's about also too, without saying too much, is how can we now, when we own those spaces, right? Those land, that land, how can we also think about creating economic driven initiatives from that land, right? And it may also stem away from yes, we're providing affordable housing, but we can use that space in a variety of ways to create an economic of scale. So I think for us, we're thinking about that okay, we'll have business owners in the space, we'll have tenants up top, but how can we also create various revenue generating initiatives, taking into consideration there's climate change initiatives, there's energy initiatives, there's different types of things that are coming down the pipeline. How are we able to use that space to activate those initiatives and drive an economy that we can use and then repurpose into purchasing the buildings that we're identifying.
We should definitely be like raising money from community and stuff, but like the government's got to pay for this. And like, let's not stop saying that. Like, of course we got to raise money ourselves, but like they got to pay for it. They got to pay for they got to take the big ticket, and we can take the like little extra ticket at the bottom. But like, and our main investors are our tenants. They pay the rent, they pay the mortgages. Tenants pay the mortgages on all buildings that are rentals. Just remember that. They're the main investors.
Yes. We are at 8:25. It's been really, really wonderful and exciting conversations, but has to come to an end. So we're going to ask Chi to close today's.
Where should I put myself? Hi, friends. Hi, virtual online cyberspace friends. I'm going to go stand next to Dane to provide an Asian balance on either side. I feel like at the opening of this, my name is Chi. I should have said that. My pronouns are she and her. Hi, I'm very new to Toronto and Dish with One Spoon territory. I come to you through the stolen lands, unceded territories of Coast Salish people in Vancouver, and before that, post-colonial Hong Kong. That is to tell you that my relationship to land is one where I believe in a world where total regimes can change, and in a world where our relationship to land can drastically change in one generation. So Kuni opened this event and made it kind of sound like none of us have ever talked to each other before, and I just want to say that that's really not true. I genuinely mean this. On my phone, on my speed dial, I literally have contacted each one of these people more than I have contacted my mom. So they are closer to me than kin. And I think our connection point is Kuni, and I think we should all give a big round of applause to... I think one of us said this over beers, but if there was ever a book to be written about the CLT movement in whatever's going on in this vibe between us in Toronto, there would be a whole chapter on Kuni weaving together a report that then introduces Amy to him via research and then kind of hooks like Dominique up with other people, and then Dane and everybody and Keisha are suddenly working on a project together. So anyway, it's way more linked than what may have been presented to you. I think the connections and networks are like a key takeaway to wherever you guys are organizing and whatever context you're coming from to this event, and hopefully that serves as a point of inspiration. So big shout out and a round of applause to all of the panelists, my friends. Thank you in particular, shout out to Norma and the Planners Network, and maybe specifically to all of you due-paying members of the Planners Network. That is both a call out and an encouragement to support their work. I am a delinquent member of the Planners Network, but as if you've been moved by what Keisha shared at the top of the event, please do support them. So a round of applause for them for putting this together. And then shout out to Parkdale for hosting us, Jason and St. Mark's for hosting us. Thank you for just being a huge point of inspo for community organizing in Toronto in general. Thank you all so much for the work you do in this neighborhood. Jeremy deserves a shout out for the poster that made my most viral LinkedIn post of the year, as that social media platform would have me know. So shout out to Jeremy, and shout out to Anna, who is holding down the fort on the tech support and all of these multi-directional cameras that are happening. Most of all, thank you all so much for being interested enough, I know that many of you are organizers yourself. I can see you in the crowd and online as well. Shout out to the incredible amount of other land trusts that I can see represented in the names that I saw floating through the Zoom. It really feels like we're on the crest of a wave. I think, like, what? Who am I saying? Oh, shout out to Nat. Nat is someone you guys should know because we just hired Nat. Nat is waving and sitting in the second pew there in front of me. Nat is excitingly the first staff that we've hired for the Canadian network of community land trusts. Can you imagine that? It's not just us having meetings on the side of our desk. There's a real human person in charge of things. It's incredible. Shout out to us and shout out to Nat. I will try and reflect back to you what I think I heard as common threads between us, and maybe an extension of the conversations that we all already have in private and would like to offer into a public space. I think Dominica and I had a conversation where we were saying we should be so lucky to have this kind of an argument, this kind of conflict in the nuanced conversations we have with our board members and our committee. It really is economic democracy in action, a kind of democracy that we get to experience that isn't represented electeds, that isn't like just ending up in policy advocacy that goes into a void of nowhere. By the end of an argument that we have where we're crying and like almost vomiting because of the consequences of that conversation, something substantive happens. Something generative happens at the end of it. Someone ends up in a housing unit because of the conversation and argument that we were in. And I don't know that there are that many people who get to live a life in a city where they get to have that kind of an argument with a neighbor that doesn't just go nowhere on a porch and take all their energy and give you nothing back. And I think that piece of giving back has also been a theme that I've learned from all of these people. At some point in every single one of these neighborhoods, we were just tired of fighting all the time, just tired of fighting a development application, tired of fighting a new policy, tired of fighting a landlord who's at your door with a baseball bat. At some point, you need to invest your emotional energy into something that actually gives you something back. And I think it was a conversation with the rabbi in Kensington Market, right, Dominique, where he finally asked you, so what are you gonna build instead? And I think that is the desperation that the Community Land Trust movement now comes from. So I reflect with Keisha and have the opportunity to think often to what extent community land trusts are transformative in some way. And actually, I think it's really limited. Like, I don't want us to leave this event overly romanticizing this solution. It is an incredibly effective organizing tactic to respond to the reality we live in. But why should we be working so hard for a workaround? This is a workaround. It's a workaround because we are in a system that does not provide structural care. And I often think about community land trusts as a form of deep, deep community love and community care. But we could be redirecting that love and care to so many other things, to making art, to just shooting the shit on porches. And instead, we are doing this. And so I would really like to be in a world where we are not doing this. And very much it's a real estate solution. It is a solution within the private property system. And I just don't want us to conflate the two things together. Like, our excitement about community land trusts is not that simple. I think Amy said once in a meeting, are we just gonna become landlords? Are we just reinventing landlording with each other? And I just really hope that you don't see this as the end. This is the bridge. I hope that this is a portal. I hope that this is, as Eric Olin Wright would offer us, a type of erosion for whatever it is to come, whether for you it's abolition, whether it's rematriation of land, whether it's land back, whatever it is that makes more life possible. I think that's what we're interested in. So on to the next world, friends. Thank you so much for coming to this event. We are officially done. Everybody can breathe. Please get up. Please talk to one person you had not talked to before you came here.
It's Friday night.
It's Friday night.
It's Friday night. The talk is done. You can get up and move your body.